Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 7299, Fearing Escalation. So what do you think of our plan, VS? We have tried our best to improve the conditions for your giants, but this is the best that we are able to present to you on short notice. The plan had guts, that was for certain. Yet what peeved VS was that the Rebarthans conveniently evaded most of the risks. If the plan completely collapsed, then their losses amounted to nothing more than a couple of cheap and easily replaceable scout ships. The human phase lord department could potentially lose a lot more. Ascended giants were expensive. Though VS did not bother to figure out the exact numbers, he could easily visualize the huge amount of phase water, biotech support and equipment needed to raise a human phase lord from scratch. The loss of a single ascended giant was already painful for his department. The loss of a dozen of them would be a catastrophe. VS narrowed his eyes. He did not expect for the Rebarthans to try to take advantage of him and his personal forces that brazenly. The risks and rewards of this reconnaissance mission are completely out of whack, Richard. The dangers of approaching that huge battle moon is immense. What if it contains lots of firepower? What if it possesses the capacity to engulf nearby phase lords? What if it is surrounded by far too many enemy Goliaths? Sending 30 phase lords into the field may sound impressive, but you should know quite well that all of them are much more heavily gear-dependent than alien phase lords. They are too young and lack development in terms of phase water organs. I would be much more open to your idea if their phase water organs are more developed, but that is not the case. Much of the strength of phase leaders were tied to their phase water concentration, their training, their combat experience and the quantity as well as quality of their phase water organs. These variables all happen to apply to a phase lord or phase whale regardless of the presence and absence of any gear. Unfortunately, the ascended giants who only showed up for a very short amount of time did not score high on any of these aspects. They relied much more on good gear and superior numbers in order to put up a good fight. What was worse was that this was all based on theory, not practice. The human phase lords had yet to prove whether their doctrines actually worked. Committing the ascended giants to this mission was extremely reckless from that perspective. To strip them of all of their combat gear before commanding them to get in close proximity to the most dangerous alien megaconstruct that VS had witnessed this year sounded like a recipe for disaster. The probability that a single ascended giant would encounter an accident and die was far too high in his estimation. To VS, the loss of even a single one of his precious human phase lord subordinates was too heavy. It was not as if understanding the enormous biological structure of the VOBM would make much of a difference to him. He was a mech designer, not a battle moon developer. The main beneficiaries of this risky mission were the Rebarthans. Lord Richard Brownstone knew this as well. He observed VS closely and understood why his guest felt peeved by this sudden request. The Rebarthan scion made a disarming gesture. "We are aware that we are asking much from you and your men. Trust me, we prefer to fulfill this mission by utilizing our own assets in the star system, but the success rate is too low. Our previous probes have already revealed that without a formidable amount of strength, it is impossible to send any probes close enough to perform detailed scans and transmit all of the valuable data back to us. Only by relying on this hasty plan do we think we can gather the data we need to prepare proper countermeasures against this latest surprise." VS furrowed his brows. Is it truly necessary to go this far just to understand the details of the enemy battle moon? I mean, you guys have seen how it has formed. I do not believe that your biotech experts are incompetent to the point where they have no clue what all of the enemy input is doing. Even if you can't figure out anything complex, you can still hope for the best and prepare for the worst. The other mech designer shook his head in disapproval. Making hasty decisions based on speculation and fears is not a good decision-making approach, VS. We need solid and verified data even if it is risky to gather it. Do you know that our experts and analysts are so fearful of what the mutated Vorabugs may have created that they believe it may be justified to bombard it with antimatter bombs? What? Lord Richard activated a projection that displayed a potential doom scenario. In this simulation, the VOBM did not approach Philaster Crestia 3 at close range, but instead maintained distance well outside of conventional engagement range. The battle moon, surrounded by dozens of Goliaths and millions of cannon fodder, began to transform from top to bottom. It lost its spherical shape and began to morph into a gigantic moon-sized organic space cannon. Soon enough, it began to accumulate a huge amount of hot plasma. VS had no idea where it was drawing all of that energy from, but once it had reached full charge, it launched a cataclysmic plasma bolt forward with great power and momentum. Nothing could stop that plasma bolt from traversing across space. Even as it lost power as it left the barrel of the moon-sized artillery construct, nothing the humans threw at it could stop or divert its trajectory. VS looked horrified when the apocalyptic plasma bolt engulfed half of the defenses in orbit before almost immediately bathing the surface of Philaster Crestia 3 with the fury of a star. The plasma shaper is capable of building masterwork installations of this scale that are capable of performing similar feats. Richard Brownstone stated, "If we can do it, so can the mutated Vorabugs. In theory, perhaps their own rudimentary attempt at interplanetary siege warfare may not be as powerful and efficient as ours, but the enormous scale of the VOBM is forgiving. Even a half-baked attempt at developing a siege weapon of this size is enough to completely unmake all of our attempts to defend this star system. This is not even the only doom scenario that we have devised." The projection continued to play other potential instances where the VOBM could completely neuter the human defenders. The VOBM could form into a giant energy weapon battery that bombarded Philaster Crestia 3 with unblockable laser beams. It could also turn into an kinetic artillery gun that launched a continuous stream of asteroids at the planet. One of the more disturbing doom scenarios was for the VOBM to turn into an exceptionally powerful single-use mass driver that somehow accelerated a large projectile to relativistic speeds, thereby gaining the capability to shatter the planet in a single hit. This is a definite sign of escalation, VS noted. If the mutated Vorabugs dare to destroy our planets with their own version of a weapon of mass destruction, then that will give us the right to retaliate in kind. The Rubarthan liaison looked pained. That is exactly what we wish to avoid. A mutual war of annihilation will not benefit either of us. While we possess the capacity to destroy all of the planets of the neighboring star sectors, the devastation will be immense. These are all star systems that are meant to become our future territories and economic heartland if there are better times ahead. To irrevocably damage them to the point where we can no longer gain much value in holding them is an extreme measure that will cripple the long-term viability of the Rubarthan Pact. For the sake of the future of my people, we must nip this threat in the bud. We are prepared to enact extreme plans and put a great amount of lives in danger in order to make this happen, but in order to justify this response, we need to know for certain whether these actions are justified." This sounded a lot more serious than VS expected. His perspective still remained on this star system. He had not yet put much thought on the greater implications of the appearance of a potential moon-sized organic siege engine. He had to admit that the Rubarthans may be correct to fear a potential escalation. If the Goliath Hive truly embraced this extremely destructive method of warfare, then red humanity could not afford to hold back anymore. A war where both sides readily deployed planet-destroying assets against each other was a conflict that would only produce losers in the end. Not a single side would truly be able to win such a devastating clash. The final years of the Age of Conquest had deeply ingrained this lesson into the DNA of the human race. This was why red humanity still remained extremely reluctant to unleash their arsenal of nuclear weapons, antimatter weapons, and greater horrors. While it could be argued that the methods of God Mechs easily exceeded the horror created by these conventional arms, neither the humans nor the native aliens thought this way. Their actions could still be excused, especially when there were not that many God pilots to begin with. It was only when mass destruction could be perpetrated on a galactic scale that all of the combatants needed to show restraint. VS began to understand the importance of this scouting mission. By figuring out whether the mutated Vorabugs are ready to escalate their methods of warfare, you hope to send a clear and obvious message to the Devourer Queen that the Rubarthan Pact, no, red humanity will not tolerate this development, is that right? Richard began to smile. You are beginning to understand now. Since conventional means of communication are ineffective against the mutated Vorabugs, we can only let our actions convey our intentions. However, in order to know for certain whether we have formed the correct response, we must be absolutely certain whether the VOBM is built to enact any of the doom scenarios. There is still a good chance that our fears are overblown. There are also scenarios where the VOBM fulfills very different roles that each require a dedicated answer. The more we know, the better our preparations. Do you understand the value of gathering the data now, VS? Kind of, VS said in a half-certain tone. What I am hearing now only truly matters to you guys, though. No offense, but I don't see how the Human Phase Lord Department and I can benefit from putting all of my ascended giants at risk. The Rubarthan mech designer maintained a serious expression. We will not let your efforts go unrewarded. We are prepared to offer the Red Collective a great amount of compensation in phase water and high-grade resources for the loss of any ascended giant. We cannot restore the lives that may be lost, but we can at least cover the direct cost of raising their replacements. That is not nearly enough. VS scowled. We are also prepared to offer one or multiple minor favors to you, Richard revealed. These minor favors are valid for all of the Tier 1 galactic citizens of the Rebarthan Pact. You can redeem any of these favors from our god pilots or star designers whenever they are available. While you cannot make any outrageous demands, you could ask the Plasma Shaper to supply you with a design of an incredibly powerful giant-scale plasma rifle, or request the Spacelock to cooperate with Swordmaster Kedis on an experiment related to creating a longer-lasting tunnel to another dimension. Chapter 7300. Giant's First Mission. Chapter 7300. Giant's First Mission. Thank you for your willingness to commit your men to this operation. VS. The entire Rebarthan Pact is grateful that your ascended giants are rising up to the challenge. Their bravery and sense of duty are to be commended. No matter whether they are able to fulfill the objectives of their upcoming mission, we will award them with medals and other rewards. We will not let you and your men risk their lives and suffer without gain. Lord Richard Brownstone spoke sincerely while making a deep bow. The other Rebarthans in the command center followed suit. They all knew that their own assets could not complete the scouting mission. Only by relying on the capabilities of outside guests would they be able to lift the veil that shrouded the secrets of the Vorabug organic battle moon. Now that VS had made up his mind, the ball got rolling quickly. VS barely had enough time to inform the 30 ascended giants stationed on the Armitage of their new assignment before they all transferred to the pre-prepared scout vessels. Of course, these ships looked deceptively simple. Most scout ships tended to possess weak and fragile hulls. The ships assigned to this mission did not appear any different from the outside, but possessed a lot of advanced features. The additional tech made the ships tougher, faster, and more intelligent. The crews were also completely different. Most of the naval personnel assigned to scout vessels tended to be young and inexperienced, but this time was completely different. Every single spacer on the scout ships possessed elite qualifications. Their experience was abundant and possessed much more extensive skill sets than normal. All of this meant that the scout vessels provided much more safety to their crew and passengers than usual. Of course, this was just a relative statement. There was only so much high technology that the Rebarthans could stuff inside such small hulls. In preparation for this big operation, the Rebarthans had already sent out dozens of scout ships and many more scout mechs to the vicinity of the new battle moon. The Rebarthans made a persistent effort to bring their assets close in the hopes of gathering detailed data. It was rather understandable that the humans possessed a strong desire to understand the details of the unprecedented new organic megaconstruct as soon as possible. The mutated Vorabugs did not intend to let the humans get what they wanted. The patrols surrounding the new VOBM continued to grow in numbers. The globe gradually became host to more and more roaming bugs. All of these alien flies possessed very little combat power, but they were cheap and easy to mass-produce en masse. Bug after bug emerged from various corners of the outer system. Their behavior consistently proved that the Goliath Hive greatly valued its battle moon. You did not have to accompany us, my lord. The Divine Harpoon quietly spoke to VS. You are right, but I am coming with you guys anyway. Don't worry. I do not intend to enter the field myself. I just want to be close at hand. By the way, how are the men? Both VS and his strategos maintained their human bodies while they were riding aboard the small and cramped RA starships. The lack of space, the tension in the air, and the sudden assignment all put the Ascended Giants on edge. Due to their loyalty to the new Polemarchos, none of the Ascended Giants refused to take part in the mission. VS was glad that they could be relied upon to follow orders. However, just because the Giants promised to fulfill their duties did not mean they had to like what they were doing. The Ascended Giants assigned to the Blue Jay fleet are not happy. The Divine Harpoon plainly stated. They are soldiers and warriors with great egos. They had all been looking forward to entering the battlefield all at once during the decisive battle. Each of them possesses formidable strength and wishes to display their might to everyone. The grander the fight, the greater the glory. The Ascended Giants all think that performing scouting missions is beneath them. They do not fully understand the necessity for us to take action when the Rebarthans still have many assets in this star system. Divine Harpoon. VS addressed the older officer. Do you harbor the same kind of doubts? No, the strategos of the Faceless Giants immediately responded. I am an old man. I have lived through enough wars and conflicts to understand the necessity of gathering first-hand data. While I question the need to deploy all 30 of us at once, I am not dissatisfied with this task. I take it that the others are not the same. They feel as if they are being used as errand boys. You know how soldiers gossip with each other. They talk as if they are being reduced to slaves of red humanity. While there are enough sober-minded giants that understand the greater truth such as myself, we are still in the minority. There are still many giants who believe that cooperating with red humanity is a waste of time. VS scowled. This was a completely nonsensical stance. Without the shield of red humanity, the human phase lords would get overwhelmed in short order. They lacked the numbers to resist entire enemy civilizations and also lacked the individual strength to carve out their own territories in space. It was a complete fantasy for the ascended giants to defect from red humanity and found their own civilization in this hostile dwarf galaxy. Even if the native aliens under the Red Cabal decided to treat human phase lords as their kin, the mutated vorbugs would definitely not let them off. Peace was an illusion in the Age of Dawn. Will the men stay obedient? They will, at least for the time being. The strategos reassured VS. This is just the start. The men are still hopeful that they can participate in the main battle after they have completed this ordeal. If you deny them the chance to earn honor and glory in the next few weeks, then you will start to have a problem. I highly advise you not to deprive them of the opportunity to test their might against a worthy adversary. If there is one advantage that we possess, it is that none of us are cowards. That was indeed an important advantage. VS did not know whether the ascended giants would remain fearless against the mutated vorbugs for long, but at least their morale was high at the start. This granted him a lot of leeway. He was already happy that the giants did not question the viability of the current plan. As the scout vessels continued to fly towards the outer system, VS and his most trusted giant officer continued to discuss the details of the mission. Unlike other ascended giants, the divine harpoon clearly lost less of human sensibilities than others, which made him the most observant and cognizant among his kind. VS valued his wisdom, especially when the other giants tended to be fools in comparison. There are many questionable points about this mission, the older giant said. I will not waste my time explaining all of them. I will just state the most important ones to you. My first major concern is that our approach may not proceed as smoothly as we assumed. Are you afraid that the mutated vorbugs will hinder your approach much more effectively than anticipated? The strategos nodded. Yes, past attempts to scout the VOBM have been met with light resistance, but that is because the vorbugs do not need to leverage more assets to drive away scout mechs and scout ships. If we take the Goliath hive by surprise by springing 30 ascended giants in close proximity, I can guarantee you that the mutated vorbugs will respond much more heavily than before. Not only will our men have to contend against millions of angry bugs, but the VOBM itself may begin to shoot at us with an enormous amount of organic guns. We cannot stay close to the battle moon for long. That is why the plan has tried to minimize this time interval as much as possible. The Rebarthans are not ignorant of the dangers. The sensor spikes will only take a couple of seconds to complete the data gathering phase before immediately ejecting their data storage modules. Our men only need to stick to their assigned coordinates long enough to capture the data modules and retreat back to safety. What if enough time has passed by for the mutated vorbugs to wake up all of their high-priority defenses and interception forces? Then we need to fight like hell, VS simply replied. The divine harpoon did not look happy. I would be much more inclined to agree with you if we are able to deploy in full gear. However, your decision to keep the Blue Jay fleet in orbit of Philaster Crestia 3 means that we will be separated from our war gear by multiple light hours. We will have to fight against the mutated vorbugs without the arms and armor that we have come to rely upon since our transformation into ascended giants. Our ability to wipe out the mutated vorbugs en masse is limited, and our defenses are precarious. Our spatial barrier is indeed highly effective at blocking the bugs from devouring our flesh and blood in an instant, but it will only last for so long against massed attacks. VS grimaced when he heard that. The inability to bring their usual combat gear into battle deeply unsettled the giants. While they still possessed enough confidence in their combat prowess, the gear still formed an important part of their identity as soldiers of the Human Phase Lord Department. Fighting without any effective gear aside from a smart metal suit turned into a nightmare for many soldiers. VS wished that they could be accompanied by a small group of combat carriers. Compared to juggling the juvenile and impulsive emotions of ascended giants, I would rather spend my time on improving my mechs. Despite participating in this mission, the Rebarthans did not provide VS with enough restricted information. He was still a guest, and he was destined to leave and explore other stars sooner or later. This meant that he remained in the dark about whether the Rebarthans had dispatched additional forces in secret. VS guessed that the scouting vessels were all accompanied by at least one stealth carrier. Even if that was not the case, the Rebarthans would never neglect the ship that he was currently riding. A Tier 2 galactic citizen such as VS normally shouldn't accompany his men on a high-priority reconnaissance mission, but he was different. Even if he had yet to bring out the Dark Apostle on this day, VS could practically feel the eagerness and approval from his other self. Though the mission did not call for VS to intervene in person, he got ready anyway. He would have to do so naked like the rest of the giants. ETA 1 hour, the mood between the two began to drop. The closer the distance, the more horrifying the VOBM appeared. Not everyone was able to maintain their courage and balance after witnessing the enormous Vorabug organic battle moon in full glory. The mere thought that a biological construct could grow to such an exaggerated extent generated a cloud of oppression that slightly damaged everyone's confidence. Of course, the damage was only slight, or else everyone involved would have lost more than a bit of courage. Do all 30 of our men have to launch their sensor spikes at the target? Not all of them, VS replied. They will still be able to yield useful data if the odds are stacked in our favor. The Rebarthan scientists will not be able to figure out too many secrets, let alone hold them for long periods of time. I estimate that we need to plant at least 20 sensor spikes in order to gather enough details. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. Chapter 7301. A Quiet Approach. Chapter 7301. A Quiet Approach. As the remaining time passed by, the scouting vessels had begun their daring deception. They all pretended to be another regular scouting unit assigned to uncover the Battle Moon's secrets. The veteran spacers all did a good job of underselling the true capabilities of the small and nimble starships. The mutated Vorabugs certainly had no reason to suspect that this batch of vessels was any different from the ones that approached in the previous hours. So far, so good. The ascended giants of the UR Titan Phalanx and the faceless giant Phalanx all got ready to fulfill their missions. While they still remained human-sized, they were ready to unfold their true bodies as soon as the ships got close enough. Before they deployed, VS decided to address them in person. Although he preferred to let the Dark Apostle speak with them, that was currently not possible. There was simply not enough room inside the starship he was on to accommodate a body that was several times bigger than a mech. Therefore, when the giants equipped with nothing but smart metal suits got ready to deploy into space, a projection appeared into each of their faces. Men and women of the ascended giants. VS began. Very soon you shall embark on your first formal mission since my takeover. It has taken a considerable amount of time to get you here, but this is it. I am aware that many of you have dreamt of fighting against the phase leaders who answer to the Red Cabal, but the mutated Vorabugs present their own challenges. Do not underestimate them. The Goliath Hive in particular has not only developed its own Goliaths, but have also unveiled a battle moon of a scale that is unprecedented to the insect race. The ascended giants did not take this warning to heart. Gear or not, they still possessed the confidence to go in and out without letting their spatial barriers fall. VS felt that they were being way too overconfident. One of his goals with this speech was to burst their bubble in advance. We are not solely fighting against weak and mindless bugs. If any of you still harbor this stereotype, then I advise you to take a good look. Our enemy has evolved. The Goliath Princess is intimately familiar with our champions and our methods. Even if we have not yet spotted any Goliaths in the vicinity, we cannot rule out that there are several of them on guard beneath the surface of the fleshy moon. The VOBM looked peaceful and quiet on the surface. However, VS knew better than to judge a book by its cover, at least in this instance. Who knew whether the surface would explode into action and reveal lots of gun barrels when 30 giants looked as if they were about to raid the VOBM? Safety first, VS emphasized to this audience. The mission is important to be sure, but it is not critical to us. If you are about to get overwhelmed by the swarms, then you should turn back without hesitation. Do not try to be the hero. Our goal is not to fight. Our objective is to gather intelligence. Nothing more and nothing less. Since we know so little about the battle moon, stay sharp and maintain your caution. Do your best to cover your fellow giants if they are in trouble. None of you are meant to fight by yourselves. Teamwork has always been at the core of your phalanxes. Together, the giants shall triumph. The response to his speech was lukewarm. The giants respected and answered to the Dark Apostle, not VS. They sort of gotten used to the reality that their leader possessed a split personality, but that did not mean they were willing to look up to his weaker human self. Nonetheless, the giants had learned to tolerate VS, knowing that the Dark Apostle would just back up anything his human self had said. VS paid attention to the projected plot. The scout vessels had split up earlier so that they could approach the organic battle moon from multiple directions. This introduced a delay and an additional risk. VS and the Rebarthans were afraid that the mutated Vorabugs would figure out that they had been approached by assets way more significant than a bunch of small scout ships. Sweat dripped from the brows of the Rebarthan officers as they carefully tracked the flight trajectories of all of the loose Vorabug patrols. While the nearest bugs had already diverted from their previous flight paths in order to intercept the incoming human vessels, they did not seem too alarmed at what was taking place. All signs showed that the Goliath Hive lazily sent a bunch of bugs towards the ships in order to scare them away. The cannon fodder bugs were not particularly fast. Whatever means they used to navigate in space was not that powerful for the less advanced subspecies. This meant that the patrol had no chance of catching up to the scout vessels, but only as long as the latter tried their best to run away. The Vorabug patrols still served as an effective deterrence so long as the human ships insisted on getting closer. The deeper they penetrated, the greater the risk of getting surrounded and damaged. This was how a number of shuttles, mechs, and starships got damaged earlier on. The Rebarthan scouts couldn't obtain any critical data if they played it safe, so they pushed the envelope and sometimes suffered for their dedication. Subsequent scouts pulled back a bit, but never ceased their attempts to probe the VOBM. Its size and its unsettling appearance made it impossible to ignore. It made complete sense for the Rebarthans to remain obsessed with the organic megaconstruct. What the mutated Vorabugs might not know was that the Rebarthans deliberately sought to create a pattern. Ever since they came up with the plan to use the Ascended Giants to gather critical data, the Rebarthan soldiers had already set it up by conditioning the stupid bugs to lower their appraisal of human scouting attempts. The price was not light, but all of the effort paid off when the mutated Vorabugs still behaved in a manner that suggested that they had no clue of the dangerous passengers that were secretly standing by inside the small ships. VS couldn't help but curl his lips in amusement. He and the Dark Apostle never thought about employing their human phase lords in this manner. For too long, both of them had gotten used to the open and upright manner in which the native aliens deployed their own phase leaders. To them, their phase lords and phase whales were gods. It was incredibly shameful and dishonorable for gods to deliberately hide their presence and skulk about as if they were thieves. The high and mighty alien leaders who deluded themselves into thinking that they were gods could not stand for such behavior. In fact, the same applied to the Ascended Giants as well, but to a lesser degree. Since they used to be humans and had not yet become indoctrinated to a strong galactic-wide institution that had lasted for eons, the fresh and inexperienced human phase lords could still be redeemed. How long? VS asked. Minutes. Seconds. Any time now. Time continued to pass by. VS counted every second that passed without incident. He already felt proud that his boys managed to hold themselves back for so long. Under the deliberate control of veteran helmsmen, the scout vessels tried to maneuver around the intercepting Vorabug patrols. The ships managed to press closer and closer while delaying interception. While their agile maneuvering succeeded in dancing around the initial patrols for a time, they slowly got boxed in as more and more Vorabug patrols arrived from different angles. When it looked as if a collision became inevitable, the Rebarthans finally issued the fateful command. Now! Scramble all human phase lords. Good luck! The hatches of all of the scout vessels slid open. 30 Ascended Giants who had been holding themselves back all this time finally jumped into space. The entire situation drastically changed. The mutated Vorabugs did not appear to realize what was happening at first. Its cannon fodder bugs did not try to squeeze their potential to the utmost as they lazily enveloped the scout vessels. It was only when a couple of dozen humans turned into Ascended Giants and smashed apart the nearby bugs with their fists and legs that the Goliath hive seemed to do a double take. The cat is out of the bag. Finally! These bugs are disgusting. Don't waste time. Advance. Stick to the mission plan. Pick up your sensor spikes before you move. The frustrated giants had been holding themselves back for a long time. Now that they finally commenced their mission, they eagerly crushed the last of the bugs within their reach before flying towards their assigned coordinates with as much speed as they could muster. As they distanced themselves from the scout ships, they did not forget to pick up the bundles of rods that had also been ejected from the cargo holds of the small ships. The Ascended Giants fumbled with the components. They had to unbundle them from each other before slotting their ends to each other. This eventually allowed them to assemble segmented spears that formed complete sensor spikes. The custom-made devices lit up in green to confirm that they had properly been put together. VS and the Rebarthan sighed in relief when they saw that none of the giants had botched tie step. For all of their unruliness, they were still professional soldiers at heart. They knew how to follow instructions when it was time to get serious. The giants looked very different from each other. Though they all wore silvery smart metal suits that automatically bore the emblems of the Red Collective and the Phase Lord Department, their sizes were not uniform. The main reason why the Ascended Giants had to abide by a uniform scale was due to equipment constraints. Their raiments were made out of rigid alloys and could not change in size, so the human Phase Lords had little choice but to conform to the limitations of their equipment. This time, there was no need for them to do so, so the giants did not hesitate to unfold their true bodies to the limit. As expected, they were all able to grow beyond the limitations of their gear. The ones that showed the smallest increase in stature were the members of the Faceless Giant Phalanx. That made sense. The Faceless Giants were too numerous. The Phase Lord Department couldn't spare too many resources for them. They only received the necessary amount of phase water before they had to work hard to earn subsequent servings through hard work and distinctions. The Phase Lord Department already had a rudimentary reward structure in place. The more excellent giants could always find a way to earn more phase water by reaching and exceeding performance targets. Even if the quantities of phase water earned through these methods was not great, every contribution helped. So long as they remained dedicated, even the most ordinary giant could grow exceptional one day. Many faceless giants possessed plenty of motivations to pursue more growth. One of the prerequisites of transferring to an elite phalanx was to meet their minimum size requirements. This meant that they needed to digest a lot more phase water if they wanted to become more than the giant version of cannon fodder. It was clear to see that the faceless giants possessed a lot of ambitious soldiers. Outside of the Divine Harpoon, who was clearly the largest out of the bunch, over half of them exhibited significant growth that far surpassed the confines of their war gear. These should definitely be the future talents of the Phase Lord Department. Once the elite phalanxes suffered losses, they could easily replenish their ranks by requesting transfers from the faceless giants. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. Chapter 7302. Divergent Growth. Impressive. The physical projection of Lord Richard Brownstone uttered now that the Ascended Giants had revealed themselves. Although we planned for it, I am still amazed to see how a handful of scout vessels managed to transport 30 giants to the vicinity of the Vorbug organic battle moon. The ability to change your sizes to such an exaggerated extent is one of your greatest powers. It is truly perplexing that the native aliens disdained to make tactical use of this advantage. Now that the cat was out of the bag, there was no need for the scout vessels to pretend anymore. They utilized their upgraded mobility and control to deftly maneuver away from the intercepting Vorbug patrols. The ships also no longer remained silent. Even if there was no sign that the mutated Vorbugs possessed the ability to intercept and interpret communication signals, it was still a good habit for the humans to limit their signal traffic on the battlefield. Now that they were exposed, the Rebarthan scout vessels no longer isolated themselves from the local command net and linked back up with the rest of the defenders. This was how Richard Brownstone was able to communicate with VS while he remained back at Philister Crestia 3. I don't know what the native aliens are thinking either, VS idly commented. It is indeed impressive to see how far my boys have grown since they have embarked on this new life. Over half of the faceless giants exhibited moderate signs of growth beyond their minimum baselines, but it was the UR Titans that truly grabbed his attention. As the original phalanx of the Phase Lord Department, the UR Titans received a greater allocation of phase water organs, and other resources. That clearly showed when they were all able to surpass their designated scale by a noticeable extent. Although they were not accompanied by an established strategos that had a lot of time to accumulate resources, the individual UR Titans all showed plenty of ambition as the greatest among them grew as tall as 7 mechs stacked on top of each other. These giants were so much taller than their peers that the size disparity was quite significant. It was also quite easy to distinguish the UR Titans and the faceless giants from each other. The members of the elite phalanxes simply had more opportunities to further their cultivation. This was because the Phase Lord Department already intended to nurture the UR Titans into its first greater Phase Lords. Even if this was destined to become an expensive and time-consuming affair, the UR Titan phalanx needed to take the first steps if it wanted to go anywhere. In the meantime, the other phalanxes such as the faceless giants had to make do with less. This was why none of them were able to match the physical growth of the UR Titans aside from the Divine Harpoon. The presence of the latter was the only reason why the faceless giants hadn't been completely outshone by the UR Titans. Rank had its privileges, and the strategos received a much greater allocation of resources. VS, or rather the Dark Apostle, wished that he was among the giants advancing towards the VOBM. Unfortunately, the risks were too high to justify his deployment. It made little sense for the Polemarchos of the Ascended Giants to take part in a risky reconnaissance mission, especially if he needed to do so without his superdimensional raiment. As a Tier 2 galactic citizen, VS was way too important to put himself into such a precarious situation. The most he was able to do was to board one of the scout vessels and stay in reserve in case an accident took place. Many Rebarthans expected for the VOBM to present new challenges to them once it came under serious threat. The approach of 30 Ascended Giants would definitely alarm the Goliath Hive. They were all big and their spatial fluctuations could not be missed. The fact that so many lesser phase lords unveiled themselves at once would intimidate many enemies. Detecting unusual activity from the VOBM. Its surface temperature has increased by 5%. The exterior is rippling. VS found the appearance of the VOBM to be more disturbing than normal. It already looked eerie due to its organic shell. Now, the battle moon evoked even more disgust as pustules and other features started to emerge. The enormous flesh ball behaved like a mutated lab sample that had grown way past its initial size. Under the direction of the Goliath Hive, the flesh ball kept rippling while generating greater emissions. It was definitely becoming more active. Keep an eye on those organic gun barrels. Have they shown any activity? Most of the organic gun barrels are warming up. Our sensors are struggling to parse more data from them. The activity levels across the entire surface of the battle moon are rising. This is making it more difficult to analyze what the battle moon's guns are doing. As the sensor operators struggled to make sense of the changing observation data, the giants had already begun to reach their assigned positions. The scout vessels had already come quite close to the VOBM, so the giants only needed to fly for a handful of minutes before they all reached their assigned coordinates. Although each of them became more and more swamped with defending Vorabug patrols, their weak attack power made it impossible for them to breach the spatial barriers in a short amount of time. At the very least, the Goliath hive needed to dispatch stronger Vorabugs or attempt to overwhelm the human phase lords by relying on sheer numbers. Unfortunately, the Rebarthans had already done a decent job of diverting all of the Goliaths away from the battle moons. By deploying a number of expert mechs and ace mechs to the other sectors of the Philaster Crestia system, the local defenders had been able to spread out the core assets of the alien insects and make it less likely for Goliaths to remain by the side of the massive construct. If the Rebarthans showed any determination to attack the VOBM, then the Goliath hive would have ample warning to withdraw its Goliaths and bring them back. Unfortunately for the Goliaths, the ruse enacted by the Rebarthans and the Ascended Giants prevented the bugs from executing the most crucial step. Even as the nearby Goliaths did not hesitate to abandon their current missions and flew back to the VOBM with great haste, it would still take a while for them to get back. This granted the Ascended Giants ample time to complete their mission without getting blocked by the most powerful bugs in the star system. "This is actually going smoother than I thought," VS commented. Although the surrounding bug swarms immediately tried to envelop the intruding giants, their approach was not efficient. Instead of concentrating their numbers on a handful of Ascended Giants, the patrols blindly attacked the nearest enemies. The result of this brain-dead approach was that millions of cannon fodder bugs split up and diluted their formidable numbers. Instead of converging their forces on 5 giants or whatever, they sought to attack all 30 of them at once, which meant that each intruder only had to fend off tens of thousands of bugs at most. Although that still sounded like a huge amount, in practice it was not enough to turn them into buzzing flesh balls. The spatial barriers of the largest giants could easily fend them off for a longer period of time. The only giants that had entered a more precarious state were the faceless giants that had not been able to earn much merits up to this point. Their smaller sizes may have made their surface area smaller, but their spatial barriers were also much weaker than that of their peers. This meant that these giants were most at risk of suffering a collapse. "Hurry up! Get in position and throw your sensor spikes. Damn! These bugs keep blocking my vision. Keep paying attention to the state of your spatial barrier. If it dips below 50%, then toss your sensor spike and leave regardless of other instructions." Though the swarming bugs made it progressively more difficult for the giants to observe their surroundings, their smart metal suits thankfully solved this problem by helping them navigate. None of the giants failed to reach their assigned coordinates. Once they had all assumed equidistant positions around the battle moon, they unflinchingly reared back their arms backwards. "Let loose!" The giants uniformly tossed their sensor spikes straight down to the surface of the VOBM. Though there were a number of bugs in the way, the enemies were too small and weak to pose much of a hindrance. The power behind the throws were simply too great to get bogged down by these minor speed bumps. It did not take much time for the sensor spikes to get past the feeble obstacles and sink their tips into the surface of the battle moon. All 30 sensor spikes have landed on the VOBM. Multiple sensor spikes have gone off course by over 7 degrees, but remain within acceptable boundaries. Not all of the giants were expert throwers like the Divine Harpoon. It was normal for their aim to drift. Although the sensor spikes contained small inertialist boosters that could correct their course, their compact sizes limited their power. The cannon fodder bugs that attempted to block their passage also caused them to deviate from their course. It was already a small oracle that all 30 sensor spikes managed to reach their assigned zones without severe deviations. Once the Rebarthan commander confirmed that all of the sensor spikes had reached the battle moon without getting destroyed or knocked off target, he did not hesitate to issue the important command. "Commence sensor pulse." All 30 sensor spikes fulfilled their primary objectives at the same time. Each of them had already been primed in advance. Once they received the signal from the scout vessels, the devices discharged their power all at once in order to conduct a deep scan of the interior of the battle moon. The surrounding space seemed to condense for a moment as 30 powerful energy pulses rippled into the battle moon's fleshy interior. The sensor spikes not only generated all of these huge pulses, but also received whatever got bounced back or managed to pass through to the opposite side. Once the spikes received all of these signals, they automatically commenced the next phase. The data modules are about to eject. Just as planned, the exposed tops of the sensor spikes blasted away from the surface and desperately tried to climb upwards. Fortunately for the Rebarthans, much of the roving patrols rapidly tried to intercept the intruding Ascended Giants. The threat posed by the latter was so high that very few bugs had been assigned to attack the sensor spikes. This meant that there were very few bugs in position to intercept the data modules. However, their smaller sizes and weaker thrust power meant that every collision slowed them down to a much greater extent. Some of the data modules gained altitude without encountering too many enemies. Others weren't as lucky and bumped into many more cannon fodder bugs, each of which slowed down the momentum of the small data modules to a greater extent. 6 data modules retrieved. 12 data modules retrieved. 14 data modules retrieved. 17 data modules retrieved. The remaining 13 data modules have lost almost all of their momentum. They are being bogged down by a greater quantity of bugs. Retrieve them as quickly as possible. Their defenses are limited. Pay attention to whether the nearby bugs are attempting to bring them away. Tell the giants to do their best to retrieve the 13 missing data modules. This was a risky endeavor. VS felt mixed about ordering the giants to get closer in order to bring back the remaining devices, but he did not object to this instruction. Don't make the same mistake as the bugs and spread out. Work together to bring back at least 6 of them. You have 3 minutes. Once this time is up, cease pursuing the data modules. You need to get out before too many bugs are pressing on your spatial barriers. Chapter 7303. The Eyes. VS clenched his fist as he saw the giants scramble to retrieve the remaining ejected data modules. They had known in advance that this would definitely be one of the most dangerous phases of the mission. While the Rabarthan engineers had tried their best, the data modules were too small and weak to possess much ability. They struggled hard to escape the gravity well of the moon and also the obstruction of all of the cannon fodder in the way. The fact that most of them succeeded to break free could already be regarded as a minor miracle as far as VS was concerned. Unfortunately, miracle or not, there was only so much the small data modules could do in the middle of alien-controlled space. VS knew that the retrieval of 17 data modules constitutes a success, but only partially. Even if they were roughly evenly distributed across the surface of the battle moon, the gaps in the data would make it harder to figure out the full depth of the alien superconstruct. Therefore, retrieving at least half of the 13 data modules that struggled to escape Vorbug interception became critical. He consented to ordering the Ascended Giants to go forward and do their best to retrieve more data storage devices. Inwardly, his heart sank as he witnessed his soldiers engage in risky actions. He had a feeling that he may have condemned some of those earnest Ascended Giants to death due to this decision. Sending the Ascended Giants closer to the surface of the intimidating Vorbug organic battle moon was already bad enough. Doing so while they had shed all of their weapons and raiments was especially egregious. Already, the cannon fodder bugs assigned to protect the VOBM wised up to the human tricks. The Goliath Hive apparently realized that the scout vessels were not as pathetic as the ones sent in the past. The superior mobility and navigation of the current ships made it impossible to intercept them so long as they did not fly any closer. The Goliaths therefore made a very important strategic shift. Instead of trying to catch up to the fast and elusive scout ships, they all abandoned their current targets and flew back to intercept the giants. Careful, soldiers, VS immediately conveyed to his vulnerable subordinates. All of the cannon fodder in this area are moving to intercept you all. It will become much more difficult to get away. Do your best to group up and do not hesitate to set aside your latest orders if you think the situation has grown too precarious. You are Titans, do your best to shield the faceless giants. Their lack of body cultivation makes them much more vulnerable to defeat. At this time, the Ascended Giants did not care that VS was a weak human. They all understood how critical it was to group up and to escape the area around the VOBM. However, they did not want their first mission under the new leader to end up with such meager results. They understood enough to know that the importance of retrieving a handful more data modules was high. For these reasons, the Ascended Giants ignored their growing discomfort and squashed the Vorbugs in the way so that they could retrieve more compact data storage devices. They were well on their way of doing so. The bulk of the VOBM's protectors had been lured too far away from the giants due to their prior obsession of chasing after the scout vessels. This meant that there was still a window of opportunity for the giants to complete their current instructions without too much hindrance. However, the cannon fodder bugs were not the enemies that the human phase lords needed to worry about. Ever since the sensor spikes had first breached the fleshy exterior of the battle moon, the huge alien megaconstruct had begun to shake and ripple. If it was a moon, then all of this activity could easily constitute a city-destroying earthquake. The Ascended Giants no longer paid attention to the anomalies related to the battle moon. They were too busy with trying to fend off the mutated Vorbugs that stuck to their spatial barriers while also trying to save the data modules. With more and more cannon fodder bugs moving to intercept the Ascended Giants, the window of opportunity to complete their jobs and leave without getting flooded by bugs was rapidly closing. Not good, sir. The VOBM's heat emissions have risen by over 300%. Its surface is undergoing strange mutations. VS paid close attention to the projection displaying the organic battle moon. He began to feel more and more unsettled by its activity. It was as if the battle moon was previously dormant but got rudely awakened by the deep scanning attempt. Now that the Vorabugs understood that the humans had fooled them, the reprisal was sure to be considerable. How many of the missing data modules have we retrieved so far? 3. Number 4. The remaining ones are more difficult to obtain because the Vorabugs have managed to stall their ascent. The bugs are doing their best to destroy their transphasic alloy exterior as we speak. Then give up on them. Tell the Ascended Giants to abort any remaining attempts to retrieve the remaining data modules and withdraw immediately. This was clearly not in the best interest of the Rebarthan defenders, but it couldn't be helped. The missing data modules would cause certain gaps to appear once they gathered all of the salvage devices together, but that was better than letting human phase lords perish for a reconnaissance mission. Out of an abundance of caution, the Rebarthan commander was willing to resist the temptation to grab one of 2 more missing data storage devices so long as this could prevent complications. The Giants are withdrawing, sir. However, just as the Giants increasingly grouped up and forcefully pushed their way from all of the converging bug swarms, a massive change occurred. The Battle Moon is alive. What? Eyes? Eyes. There are too many eyes. Ahak. A spontaneous outburst of hysteria engulfed the scout vessel's command center. All of the Rebarthan officers and specialists took one look at the projection of the Battle Moon and felt as if an immensely powerful predator had locked onto their souls. They felt incredibly exposed. The Battle Moon was more than a massive mound of meat. To the Rebarthans affected by its anomalous existence, they felt as if they were ants that were about to get crushed by a godlike being. It was not just the crew of the scout vessels that became affected by this sudden shift. The Ascended Giants also became paralyzed for a moment. So long as the VOBM entered their peripheral vision, they could not help but lock eyes at one of the many eerie eyeballs that had risen from the surface of the fleshy moon. It only took less than a dozen seconds for the Battle Moon to spawn more than 1,000 eyeballs the size of city blocks or greater. The degree in which they disturbed the nearby combatants went beyond their unsettling visual appearance. For whatever reason, the Battle Moon carried a powerful consciousness that momentarily overwhelmed the Giants and humans. The only one in the vicinity who managed to resist this effect was VS, and even he was feeling the pressure. "Wake up!" he roared over the communication channel. "Don't look at the moon. Focus on retreating." The paralyzed soldiers gradually managed to get their act together. The Ascended Giants woke up sooner due to their transcendent nature. Even if their minds and souls had not grown as extensively as their true bodies, they still weren't as weak as ordinary humans. The elite spacers serving on the upgraded scout vessels woke up a little later. Despite their tempering and discipline, it had truly been a struggle for them to regain their wits. What happened? I feel so cold. Deal with this later. Focus on the mission. The threat has not passed. The strange effect had quietly passed. Even VS had not noticed when it disappeared. All he knew was that when he looked at the projection of the eyeball-covered Battle Moon, it no longer exerted as much pressure as before. VS briefly frowned. There was no way that this kind of mental effect was normal. He only experienced this kind of pressure from true god-level entities. Had the mysterious Devourer Queen extended her greater awareness to the Battle Moon in person so that she could take a peek of what was taking place? No way. It sounded absurd, but that may be exactly what just happened. Though the Battle Moon apparently hadn't been able to maintain the effect for long, it was already scary enough that it had managed to maintain this effect for a short duration. This was because the momentary disruption not only disrupted the flight of all of the scout vessels, but also caused the Ascended Giants to become passive for this duration. This not only caused them to become mobbed by a greater number of Vorabugs, but crucially delayed their withdrawal. "Get out of there!" VS shouted. He felt a lot less at ease now that the Battle Moon had woken up. Its emissions continued to rise, which meant that it was definitely about to take action. The Giants in the field clearly understood the urgency. They tried their best to make it out regardless of whether they carried a data storage module or not. The earlier event had already spooked them. They had no intention of staying any longer than necessary. Even the most arrogant Ascended Giant knew that it was a bad idea to fight against the Battle Moon. Unfortunately, the Goliath Hive did not intend to let them off. The previously dormant organic guns began to open fire. The Ascended Giants are under attack. The guns predominantly launched low-powered plasma bolts, many of which ended up burning Vorabugs or passing through empty vacuum. Despite the flawed accuracy of all of the organic guns, plenty of plasma bolts ended up striking the spatial barriers of the Ascended Giants. The integrity of their energy barriers dropped at an accelerated rate. While the power of an individual plasma bolt was not enough to tear down the spatial barriers, the quantity of organic guns was too much. Without any serious gear, their defenses and mobility were much less impressive than before. This would make it much harder for them to get away before the plasma bolts began to burn their flesh. "Withdraw. You are Titans. Cover the faceless Giants as much as you can." Despite the chaotic situation, the Ascended Giants did not forget their training. the UR Titans conspicuously fell behind the faceless giants. The elite human phase lords were able to withstand considerably greater damage. This meant that they possessed a responsibility to cover for the weaker giants. None of the UR Titans complained. Their phalanx possessed a strong defensive focus from the start. Even without thick and sturdy raiments, none of them feared getting burned by dozens of plasma bolts. Of course, just because they were dedicated to their mission did not mean that they were eager to get burned. The UR Titans pushed their smaller colleagues forward just so that they could move out of the effective range of all of the organic plasma guns. However, this was not the only means the Battle Moon relied upon to defend itself. Watch out, giants! Tentacles incoming! Within seconds, hundreds of tentacles burst out of the fleshy exterior of the Battle Moon and struck over half a dozen giants. Many of them suffered severe kinetic impacts and flew off course. Though the giants recovered quickly and continued their desperate flight, the tentacles kept growing longer and longer until they tried to envelop the escaping interlopers. Though numerous giants managed to slip away, 3 giants got caught. The tentacles pressed onto their faltering spatial barriers and threatened to bring them back. Chapter 7304. The Divine Dilemma. A major accident occurred. 3 giants got caught by the Battle Moon's tentacles. One of them was an UR Titan that possessed a fairly large body. The other 2 consisted of faceless giants who possessed much smaller bodies. Despite his size, the UR Titan inspired greater confidence. His expression showed that he was still full of defiance. His superior strength and phase water concentration meant that he was tougher to take down. He was able to exert more force and his spatial barrier was also a lot more resistant. The condition of the latter happened to be a lot more pessimistic. The faceless giants were much smaller relative to the tentacles. Although that also made it harder for multiple tentacles to latch onto them, that was not that big of a problem as they simply stacked on top of each other. The smaller giants already started to disappear from sight. Get off! Save them! Both UR Titans and faceless giants briefly converged on their trapped comrades. They relied on a combination of physical force, spatial abilities, and companion spirit abilities to dislodge the tentacles. They achieved a lot of initial successes. While the tentacles appeared thick and strong, the reality was that they were made out of low-quality flesh and materials. In the face of the power of many phase lords, the tentacles broke and spilled blood in every direction. Multiple tentacles tore apart as they sought to free their trapped comrades. However, the Battle Moon's greatest strength was not its resilience, but its abundant resources. Even as tentacle after tentacle got torn away, more of them spawned into existence and replaced the existing ones. The Divine Harpoon scowled as he relied upon his bare strength to tear a tentacle apart by himself. Unlike his subordinates, his size and strength was much greater on account of being a strategist. This made it much easier for him to destroy the alien entanglement, but he was just a single combatant. When matched up against a Battle Moon that could dynamically spawn more tentacles by relying on its vast flesh reserves, his strength was ultimately feeble, especially when he was not specialized in close-ranged combat. In fact, most of the giants were proficient in melee combat, but that did not matter all that much when they were lacking in gear. Without the right weapons and armor, their combat effectiveness was just a fraction as powerful. The Divine Harpoon clearly saw that there was no end to this threat. Even as he and his subordinates kept tearing apart the tentacles by relying on their collective strength, the Battle Moon's rate of replenishment proved to be too great. Without inflicting serious damage to the VOBM, the alien megaconstruct could easily spawn new tentacles at will. In fact, the amount of tentacles that entangled the 3 human phase lords had not decreased, but increased. The situation was growing worse over time. Not only was the quantity of tentacles increasing, but the biological plasma cannons had never ceased firing. The mutated Vorbugs no longer swarmed the giants directly, but showed a bit of tactical acumen by circling around so that they could form a blockade around the escape routes. In short, the longer this situation persisted, the greater the probability that more giants would end up getting stuck. The Divine Harpoon clearly fell into a dilemma. It was too hard for his men to put up a serious fight without adequate war gear. The difference it made was far too great. Many giants already resembled the decision to deploy without their arms and armor. The giants now faced an agonizing choice. They could either choose to abandon their trapped comrades and flee with their remaining lives and bounty intact, or they could persist and risk losing the lives of more giants in the process. This dilemma paralyzed them for a time. While the Rubarthans kept transmitting instructions for the ascended giants to cut their losses and abandon their trapped colleagues, the human phase lords felt unwilling to abandon their comrades. Regardless of whether they were UR Titans or faceless giants, they all considered each other kin. They were like a huge extended family. Abandoning their brothers and sisters in the face of this alien peril would be an agonizing decision. Though most of them used to be professional soldiers who knew that they needed to be cold-blooded at times, their new lives as ascended giants had given them the illusion that they had become powerful enough to ignore these trade-offs. They never expected their first mission under their new leader to put them back in such a dire situation. At this time, the giants failed to form a single consensus on the problem, and that turned into a problem. With more and more tentacles converging on the giants, the rescuers may end up needing saving in short order. It was at this time that they needed clarity and decisiveness the most. Just before the tentacles enveloping the trapped UR Titan grew strong enough to reel him into the fleshy embrace of the battle moon, sharp and powerful shards of ice suddenly appeared from the distance and cut into the fleshy appendages. The sharp ice shards cut and wounded the tentacles with unusual effectiveness. Even if the ice elemental attacks failed to sever the large and thick tentacles straight away, the damage they suffered was already enough to weaken them by 10 to 50%, which was more than enough for the surrounding giants to tear them apart in short order. I have arrived. Reinforcements had arrived. Against the strong recommendations of the Rebarthans, VS had chosen to step onto the battlefield in person. He chose to let out the Dark Apostle. While his alter ego lacked the high-quality war gear that had been prepared back in the Blue Jay fleet, he was better off than the rest of his giants. That was because he could still resort to other solutions. At this time, the value of a size-changing artifact had skyrocketed. Previously, VS had begun to favor the Ocean Caller less and less. He no longer held much interest in deepening his understanding of the water element now that he had roughly formed his foundation in this field. As a pure melee weapon, VS could easily make use of other armaments that were much more effective at close range. He could rely on a plasma weapon if he wanted to burn lots of Vorabugs. He could also wield a superdimensional spear if he wanted to penetrate the spatial barriers of enemy phase leaders. Whacking them apart with the physical bulk of the Ocean Caller seemed much less effective and more primitive by comparison. At the same time, the boost in water manipulation may be considerable, but VS never regarded himself as a chi cultivator who specialized in the water element. His ability to leverage the water element to attack, defend, or other tasks was not impressive. Even if he was actively making use of Blinky's talent in energy control, he and the Dark Apostle's lack of comprehension and affinity in water hindered their applications. However, it just so happened that their mediocre water manipulation capabilities proved helpful during this crucial stage. Due to the positioning of the ship that VS previously boarded, the Dark Apostle was only able to lend a hand to the trapped UR Titan. Although he also wanted to rescue the pair of trapped faceless giants, they were positioned on the other sides of the large battle moon. Even if the Dark Apostle could circle around and launch ice shards at the tentacles that trapped his other subordinates, the time expended on this plan was too great. The spatial barriers of many faceless giants had already reached their limits at this time. In fact, the Dark Apostle already observed a couple of them that had backed away because their spatial barriers had already broken apart. Their bodies became vulnerable and a few of them even started to suffer serious plasma burns. Rescue the Reed King! The Dark Apostle roared over the communication channel. Now that he had stepped in, he did not want his efforts to go to waste. This was no time for the giants to waver. They needed to rescue the precious UR Titan at all cost. Sir, what about the Divine Wheel and the Divine Aporia? The strategies of the faceless giant Phalanx asked. I have called for Rebarthan reinforcements to assist in their rescue. They have 20 seconds. The Rebarthans had not just sent out their upgraded scout missions to the VOBM. At this time, dozens of hidden assets turned off their cloaking technology and began to open fire with whatever weapon systems they possessed. Stealth mechs and stealth shuttles launched precision attacks that did not possess a lot of power, but helped with severing one tentacle after another. However, the Divine Wheel and the Divine Aporia still remained trapped. The stealth assets were divided among the two due to their positioning. It was far too difficult for them to concentrate their fire. They had no choice but to keep up their current efforts, yet that failed to change the status quo. The battle moon kept regrowing the damaging tentacles in less than a minute. Its rate of replenishment was too fast, especially when the composition of the tentacles was not that complicated. In the first place, the simpler the flesh structure of the mutated Vorabugs, the easier it was for the insects to regenerate the damage. While the gesture of the Rebarthans briefly boosted the morale of the giants, the trapped giants still remained under the entanglement of too numerous tentacles. In fact, the pressure they endured became so great that their spatial barriers eventually collapsed. Ah! My bones are getting crushed. Just as the Dark Apostle's assistance proved timely and helpful enough to free the trapped UR Titan, he simultaneously made a painful decision. Withdraw. They can't be saved anymore. Do not let their sacrifice go to waste. You can avenge them later, but don't let the battle moon trap you as well. As unwilling as they felt, the ascended giants hadn't lost their sanity. They still retained enough good sense to understand the meaning of sacrifice. As their expressions betrayed their inner turmoil, the remaining giants nonetheless abandoned the Divine Wheel and the Divine Aporia to their fates. Even as the pair of the faceless giants screamed and broadcasted their final tortuous words, the giants armed up their massive hearts and focused on withdrawal. While many of them had lost their spatial barriers at this time, the strength of the UR Titans proved decisive. Enough. Not only did they lead the vanguard and smash through the obstruction of hundreds of thousands of mutated Vorabugs, they also relied on their larger bodies to swat and push away lots of enemies. Though bug after bug landed on their unarmored bodies and tried to gnaw on their skin and flesh, their progress was too slow due to their horrible efficiency of burrowing into the flesh of a phase lord. With the help of the Dark Apostle's water manipulation and the precision attacks of the Rebarthan stealth assets, the remaining giants eventually managed to escape the reach of the Vob's plasma cannons and tentacles. The giants hastily returned to the waiting scout vessels and eagerly shrunk in size until they reached the scale of ordinary humans. At this time, their reluctance to return to their human-sized statures no longer mattered. Their greatest priority was to get away with their lives intact. They could worry about the decision to abandon 2 of their comrades later. Right now, they needed to retreat to space that red humanity still controlled. The further they moved away from the scary battle moon, the better. Many of the giants closed their eyes and ignored the haunting screams of the divine wheel and the divine aporia. By this time, their communications with the entangled faceless giants had cut off. Whether this was due to signal blockage or worse, they could not tell. More chapters TME/+Z7IE New Jersey QSLFMZMMY6. Chapter 7305. Bitter Truths. The mood among the ascended giants assigned to the Blue Jay fleet remained glum during the return journey. As soon as the Dark Apostle reluctantly shrunk his true body and relinquished control back to VS, the former also foisted this mess onto his other self. I am not good with this stuff. You deal with this problem. VS grimaced but did not reject this responsibility. As a leading figure and a former patriarch, he was no stranger to sacrifice. He had driven the lives of many Larkin sons to their deaths due to his decisions and mistakes. This time was no different except for the fact that this was the first time that 2 ascended giants fell as a consequence of his orders and decisions. He could not escape culpability for the losses suffered during the reconnaissance mission. Suffice to say, the surviving giants did not feel happy about this. They had been thrown into an adverse situation and had been forced to confront a completely unfamiliar alien superenemy. If their luck was any worse, they could have easily suffered double or even triple losses. Even so, the unfortunate demise of the divine wheel and the divine aporia was already far too much as far as most giants were concerned. VS also thought this way. He still felt that if he formed a more meticulous plan or let the Dark Apostle accompany his troops from the start, he may have been able to prevent the losses from occurring. He shook his head. Thinking too much about what-ifs was a dead end. VS had led enough operations to overcome this kind of guilt. If he wanted to atone for any perceived mistakes, then he needed to focus on doing better next time. He already began to formulate a few ideas on how to prevent this outcome from happening again. He needed to have a good talk with the cadre of the Phase Lord department in order to explore which ones they should pursue. For now, he was more interested in learning whether the sacrifice had been worth it. Had they managed to retrieve enough data? We are still analyzing the data, VS. The projection of Lord Richard Brownstone responded. Your men have retrieved 21 out of 30 data modules. That is less than ideal. While the remaining 9 data spikes transmitted crucial data to the scout vessels, they only managed to do so for a short amount of time before the battle moon crushed them apart. Whether that is enough to understand the full scope of the battle moon remains to be seen. From what we are able to gather so far, the VOBM is anything but a simple collection of low-quality flesh. There are significant anomalies hidden beneath the surface that have taken all of us by surprise. We should have preliminary answers available to you by the time you return to Phil Astor Crestia 3. That sounded rather mysterious. The Rebarthan analysts may have gotten stumped by what the data had shown to them. That reinforced the theory that the enemy battle moon possessed a hidden secret. If nobody took the initiative to probe the VOBM at an early stage, then it may have been able to catch the Rebarthan defenders off guard during a critical moment. Tell me everything once I get back. VS responded in a serious tone. My troops have suffered. I at least need to know whether their sacrifice was not in vain. I hope you will also abide by the agreement of compensating my department for our losses. No problem, Richard said. We have no intention of hiding the results of our analysis. We know who is responsible for helping us understand the depth of the enemy battle moon. You are entitled to know the full details. As for compensation, we have no intention of reneging on our promises. The Brownstone Principality is already arranging a shipment of phase water and other precious materials to the headquarters of the Phase Lord Department. We estimate that this should be enough to nurture 2 human Phase Lords. The compensation could not bring back the dead, but the resources should at least make it a lot easier to replace the losses. That was all VS could ask for. He did not dare to issue any excessive demands. That is all I wanted to hear for the time being. We will talk more once I return. The call ended. VS spent a few minutes on paying attention to enemy pursuit. The Vorabugs originally assigned to guard the battle moon had become incensed after the Phase Lords damaged the exterior of the castle. Although the VOMB maintained its position for the time being, hundreds of thousands of mutated Vorabugs still chased after the retreating vessels. The annoying bugs showed no sign of giving up. It would be problematic if other bugs appeared and blocked their passage. The Rebarthan spacers were not blind. They could think up this possibility as well, which was why they took more precautions. Strangely enough, no surprise ambushes took place during the return trip. The bug swarms chasing after the scout vessels never turned away. The Goliath Hive simply sent them on a chase without bothering to command them to stop for whatever reason. The defenders of Philaster Crestia III eventually wiped them out as soon as the insects entered into weapon range. They all died without achieving anything important aside from deterring the scout vessels from attempting a second reconnaissance mission. Maybe that was the point. More than a few people started to suspect that the mutated Vorabugs initiated a secret change. VS was not so sure about this theory. He was much more inclined to believe that the Goliath Hive simply issued a casual order to all of those bugs before forgetting about their existence. In any case, they were not a problem anymore. He briefly accompanied the giants as they transferred back to the Armitage and remained in control over their emotions. Most of the ascended giants definitely harbored varying degrees of discontent in their hearts. If VS did not address them right away, their approval towards him would definitely suffer a significant blow. Fortunately, the return trip gave VS enough ideas on how to resolve this problem. He did not let the ascended giants rest, but instead called them over to a large assembly hall in order to hold an important discussion. As they all filed into the cavernous chamber, the entrance closed. No mortal human was allowed to listen in to this conversation. All of the ascended giants had restored their true bodies to the size of a mech by this time. VS naturally did not insist on addressing them in his human form. He took a deep breath before he began to unfold his true body. The Dark Apostle took over again. Though he possessed a different mind, he could still reference the thoughts and plans of his weaker self. VS knew the Dark Apostle too well, for his plans just so happened to align with his goals and ideology. The Polemarchos of the Ascended Giants twitched his lips. The giant leader did not appreciate the blatant manipulation, but he truly saw no better way to address this problem. He stared into the gazes of his subordinates. The Divine Harpoon and a couple of other giants still maintained their trust in their leader. The rest showed signs that they were upset with their new leader. The Dark Apostle intended to address the latter. He did not necessarily need to conquer all of them. Even a partial success could already stabilize his position among the powerful troops. Giants, he began. Today is not a good day. 2 of our comrades have left our side. The Divine Wheel and the Divine Aporia will be remembered as the first giant casualties of the Vorabug War. I will not pretend that we could have avoided this outcome if we approached this mission differently or refused it outright. I bear responsibility for this. You can blame me all you want for ordering you to approach an biological battle moon with completely unknown capabilities. However, rather than blaming me or obsessing over the details, it is best if I clarify a few truths. What truths may that be, sir? The Divine Harpoon asked in genuine curiosity. First, you all need to shed whatever arrogance lingers in your mind. The Dark Apostle firmly stated. Ever since I took over, I told you guys that dreaming about independence is a fool's errand at this stage. Most of you have only just ascended to your current forms in less than a year. You are practically babies compared to more seasoned alien phase leaders. Whatever delusions of grandeur that you have gone through in the process is an illusion. If you cannot match the strength of just a single hastily grown Vorabug organic battle moon, what makes you think you can challenge the human race or other alien races of the Red Ocean? Nobody could refute this logic. The Dark Apostle could observe from the changing expressions that the giants reluctantly swallowed this bitter pill. Good. Their critical thinking ability had not completely atrophied. That made the situation a bit better. The Dark Apostle was not afraid of dealing with stupid giants. What he truly could not tolerate were giants who refused to learn and do better. This is just the first truth that you must acknowledge. Without sufficient strength, it is useless to think about greater ambitions. Wait until one of you has become an ancient phase lord before thinking about setting up your own independent group. Follow the example of the Huntsman and the Polymath. Do not make a move before you have gained the power of a true god. Whether the giants would abide by this recommendation remained to be seen. Subsequent rounds of indoctrination from the Red Ocean would lead them astray again. Another truth that I wish to impart to you all is that we truly cannot do without human support. You may dislike the humans all you want, but they are highly accomplished in science, engineering, and most recently cultivation science. Now that you have completed an operation without the use of human-designed and human-produced war gear, do you think you can develop this all by yourselves? The Dark Apostle sardonically smirked. Thought so. I have told you this before, But I will repeat my words again. Technology is an incredibly powerful asset. It can give weaklings the power to destroy the strong. This is why we must do our best to take advantage of human innovations. You have witnessed firsthand how weak you are without your raiments and your giant-sized armaments. I believe that this will not be the last time that you will be forced into a fight without the right equipment at hand. Several giants scowled. They hated the reminder of their recent helplessness. How can we become stronger, sir? The young Polemarchos grinned. I am glad you asked. In my opinion, we need to rethink our approach towards combat. We have obsessed too much over drawing our strength from rigid war gear that we have neglected other sources of power. Phase water organs can grant us strength and allow us to manipulate the fabric of space. Our equipment also needs to fit us better. If we can develop scalable gear or find a way to carry pocket spaces with us, we will be able to fight our enemies at our full strength at any time. This was clearly a big subject that required a lot of debate and exploration. The Dark Apostle needed to sit down with the cadre of the Ascended Giants and have a good talk about fleshing out the combat system of their kind. One of the most important lessons that VS and the Dark Apostle had learned on this day was that trying to imitate mechs was not a good idea. The Ascended Giants possessed their own distinctive traits. Their mentalities also differed from alien phase lords and phase whales, which meant that they were open to embracing new ideas. As far as the Dark Apostle was concerned, the Ascended Giants were still young enough that they could be molded like clay. They could turn into anything so long as the Giants were still in a transitionary period. More chapters t.me/+z 7IE New Jersey QSLFMZMMY6. Chapter 7306. The Core of the Battle Moon. After spending a bit of time and effort, the Dark Apostle gradually managed to placate his giants. He reframed the events and painted the casualties in a different light. We are not the chosen ones in this galaxy or reality, he told the gathered giants. We are the underdogs. Just as the human race had to struggle for survival throughout the Age of Conquest, courage, strength, persistence. These are the qualities we need to develop if we want to gain a sustainable foothold in this dwarf galaxy. Currently, we are unable to satisfy this minimum standard, which is why 2 of our brothers has failed to pass this test. We have failed to pass this test. The giants all looked subdued and admonished. The Dark Apostle spoke in a judging tone because he truly felt that he and his people failed to do a good enough job of proving themselves during this ordeal. They clearly could not go on like this. At the very least, the Dark Apostle wanted to wake his fellow giants up and remind them of certain truths. Power is not bestowed. It is seized. The recent mission shows what happens to giants who fail to do the latter. The qualities that you have demonstrated during the encounter with the Battle Moon is decent, but far from enough to survive the subsequent ordeals. Gear is not enough to establish your strength as Ascended Giants. Our race has other advantages, from phase water organs to chi cultivation. Neglecting these means of strengthening is stupid. Since we are so weak that even the Goliath hive can topple us over, we do not have the luxury to neglect these aspects. The Dark Apostle continued to hammer the point that the Ascended Giants needed to work a lot harder to become strong enough to survive the Red Ocean. Acting as if they had already become the favored sons of the Red Ocean just as they turned into human phase lords instilled the wrong mentality in their heads. He knew that words alone could not fully shake off their acquired sense of arrogance, so he had to be more unscrupulous and take advantage of an awful incident like this to truly hammer home his point. Fortunately, it worked. More and more Ascended Giants found it difficult to maintain their pride and conceit during this debriefing. Even if it was not quite fair for him to blame the deaths of the 2 giants on these reasons, it was still a good way for the Dark Apostle to cast aside responsibility and divert the attention of his men. Make no mistake, giants, he said as he stared into everyone's eyes. Tests like these will keep coming. Even if the new frontier is at peace for a time, I will not allow you to grow too comfortable. The Ascended Giants must continue to fight and struggle in order to definitively prove our right to exist. This is non-negotiable as far as I am concerned. In this respect, the weakest groups of our kind must fight the hardest. It is not a coincidence that a pair of faceless giants has perished today. They are challengers who have yet to earn a place in an elite phalanx. So long as this is the case, they will always be smaller and weaker than an UR Titan or a flesh chopper. The faceless giants grimaced. The last incident had made the differences between them and the UR Titans a lot more pronounced. The difference in scale, skills, and judgment had become particularly obvious during the reconnaissance mission. Even the weakest UR Titan had still managed to prove a lot stronger and more resilient compared to the strongest faceless giant after the Strategos. It was as if the faceless giants were still children compared to the UR Titans. This was how big the difference between the 2 groups had become. The Dark Apostle grinned at the frustration and resentment shown by the faceless giants. That is it. Those are the looks I wanted to see from you all. Without ambition, how can you pursue strength? It is only right for you to acknowledge that you are weak. Only then will you fight with greater sincerity. As far as I am concerned, more and more faceless giants will perish as the Red War and the Vorabug War progress. Cannot be helped. Your strength is weak while our opposition is strong. Only by confronting our enemies on a repeated basis will you learn how to cope with worthy foes and earn your place among the strong. VS and the Dark Apostle both agreed that this was necessary. Instead of cherishing the lives of every single faceless giant as if they were delicate treasures, was better to treat them as raw ores. They all had the potential of greatness, but they were too immature at this time. Only by tossing them into the crucible of war would the faceless giants be able to develop their strength and realize their potential in the shortest possible time. This was an inherently harsh and cruel process. War was not kind to participants, and the Dark Apostle had no doubt that dozens more faceless giants would die or become crippled in the coming years. He was already prepared to treat the standard phalanges as the proven grounds for the strong. Even if there was no crisis taking place at the moment, he could always manufacture one in order to put the faceless giants through a dangerous ordeal. A part of the Dark Apostle might feel guilty about this, but this was a necessary step to nurturing the strength of his kind. The societal revival theory did not apply to the human race alone. It was universal enough to apply to the giants as well. The lecture continued. After the Dark Apostle conveyed his main points to his subordinates, he began to cast his vision to the future. We will all do better in the future. The latest incident has exposed very glaring shortcomings that we must address in one way or another. It will become necessary for all of you to embrace methods that you ordinarily do not approve of. You will learn the details in time once we have managed to flesh out the details. The Dark Apostle was not yet willing to discuss the specifics because he had not yet set them all in stone. His vision for the ideal version of an ascended giants had to be multifaceted and comprehensive. However, VS understood that it was not realistic for his men to develop in multiple different fields at once. All of this demanded a lot of consideration from himself as well as others. He did not dare to make decisions by himself in this important matter. Once the session came to an end, the Dark Apostle dismissed the giants. While they grew curious about the results of the deep scanning attempt, the Polemarchos did not have the answers. I shall share the details later once I have finished my next appointment. The Rubarthans will give us answers soon enough. When the giants reluctantly exited the assembly chamber, the Dark Apostle waited for a few more minutes until the projection of the Rubarthan liaison came online. Thank you for your patience, VS? Or is it the Dark Apostle? Lord Richard Brownstone sounded a little uncertain. The latter, the Dark Apostle calmly answered. You promised answers. Now give them, human. The Rubarthan mech designer did not look pleased when addressed in this manner, but he knew better than to cause an incident. He instead activated a projection that showed a simplified model of a cross-section of the Vorabug organic battle moon. This is what the VOBM looks like on the inside. As you can see, the level of detail is not entirely sufficient. There are gaps and areas of uncertainty where greater clarity remains absent. Nonetheless, with the complete data of 21 units and the incomplete data of 9 units, we have been able to gain a detailed enough overview to make a number of crucial deductions. The projection of Richard lifted his finger and pointed at the very center of the cross-section. Does this shape look familiar? The Dark Apostle frowned as he took a closer look at the strange shape at the center. It initially looked like an irregular spherical core, but now that he studied the contours a little more, it did not appear to be an uncomplicated gathering of higher density matter. It took half a minute for the Dark Apostle to make a gradual realization. The cross-section image did not make it too obvious, but he was sure he could connect dots a lot sooner if he obtained a three-dimensional image of the scan data. Is this an embryo? Richard nodded. We are 90% of this. Our initial assumptions were inaccurate. We believed that the VOBM was large but not particularly outstanding. Although it has absorbed modest quantities of higher-grade materials during its short existence, we thought that the battle moon would disperse them across its entire structure. The scans disproved this theory. The battle moon deliberately concentrates more precious materials to the core. All of the flesh around the center can be regarded as a colossal shell. It looks as if the Goliath hive has created a giant incubation chamber. The Dark Apostle concluded. We believe so as well. While we are still convinced that the VOBM is meant to function as a massive siege engine, this is not its sole purpose. We have modeled different scenarios of how the decisive battle might unfold. This will undoubtedly become a difficult struggle where our side will suffer considerable losses. That is already bad enough, but when we take into account that the mutated Vorabugs can scavenge our defeated assets, the scenarios become much darker. Think about what happens if the bugs can retrieve our defeated mechs, warships, and orbital defense platforms. The Dark Apostle widened his eyes. They will probably throw it all into the battle moon. Exactly. We believe that the battle moon will be able to process the wrecks at a very fast pace. Low-grade materials will get broken down quickly and be used in the production of cannon fodder bugs. Higher-grade materials will be transferred to the core where they will contribute to the growth and development of a formidable Goliath. At the very least, the VOBM acts as an incubator for a level 7 Goliath. The more pessimistic scenario is that the Battle Moon serves to incubate a level 8 Goliath. Level 8 Goliath. That roughly corresponded to the strength of a greater phase lord or a senior ace pilot. If this was true, then the birth of such a powerful Goliath would spell the end of the Battle of Philaster Crestia. Even with 28 ascended giants in the star system, the Dark Apostle found it difficult to believe that his troops would be able to rely on numbers to overcome the absolute gap in strength. Maybe their situation would become a lot more optimistic once they acquired better gear and gained more experience, but they were not ready to confront enemies of this magnitude at this time. As the Dark Apostle continued to stare at the diagrams and images, he had a feeling that the VOBM truly meant business in the star system. More chapters in t.me/+z 7IE New Jersey QSLFMZMMY6. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.